So, hello and welcome back. And here we are at the end of another book. This one really seemed to go by fast. I mean, it is a shorter book than I guess Pride and Prejudice was, but it really did seem to kind of fly by. It's also interesting I was thinking about this before I sat down today to record it. It's interesting that so far in our public domain reading adventures, so many of our main characters have been like kind of unlikable. And that's interesting because I feel like modern authors do their best to make their heroes as relatable and likable as possible. And I mean, not to say that Elizabeth Bennet was not likable, but so many of the characters were so faceted, maybe even kind of unlikable. And it might just be, again, to our modern eyes. I mean, maybe Victor was who everyone was aspiring to be back then, but from my perspective, he's a little bit of a spoiled brat. Definitely spoiled brat. He's very entitled. And yeah, I'm still identifying so much more with the monster, despite the fact that the monster is the one that's actually killing people. I guess that just says a lot more about me than it does about the book. But yeah. Anyway, we are definitely at the end of another book, so I guess without too much further ado, because this is not the longest chapter in existence, but it is still a decently long chapter. But yeah, let's just go ahead and finish up Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley, with Volume 2, Chapter 7. My present situation was one in which all voluntary thought was swallowed up and lost. I hurried away by fury. Revenge alone endowed me with strength and composure. It molded my feelings and allowed me to be calculating and calm at periods when otherwise delirium or death would have been my portion. My first resolution was to quit Geneva forever, my country, which, when I was happy and beloved, was dear to me, now in my adversity had become hateful. I provided myself with a sum of money, together with a few jewels which had belonged to my mother, and I departed. And now my wanderings began, which are to cease but with my own life. I have traversed a vast portion of the earth and have endured all the hardships which travelers in deserts and barbarous countries are wont to meet. How I have lived, I hardly know. Many times have I stretched my failing limbs upon the sandy plain and prayed for death, but revenge kept me alive. I dared not die and leave my adversary alive. When I quitted Geneva, my first labor was to gain some clue by which I might trace the steps of my fiendish enemy. But my plan was unsettled, and I wandered many hours round the confines of the town, uncertain what path to pursue. As night approached, I found myself at the entrance of the cemetery where William, Elizabeth, and my father reposed. I entered it and approached the tomb which marked their graves. Everything was silent, except the leaves of the trees, which were gently agitated by the wind. The night was nearly dark, and the scene would have been solemn and affecting even to an uninterested observer. The spirits of the departed seemed to flit around and to cast a shadow which was felt but not seen around the heads of the mourner. The deep grief which this scene had at first excited quickly gave way to rage and despair. They were dead, and I lived. Their murderer was also alive, and to destroy him, I must drag out my weary existence. I knelt on the grass, and I kissed the earth, and with quivering lips I said, by the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, by the deep and eternal grief I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and the spirits that preside over thee, to pursue the demon who caused this misery, until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. For this I will stay alive, to execute this dear revenge. Will I again behold the sun and tread the green grass of earth, which otherwise should vanish from my eyes forever. And I call on you, spirits of the dead, and on you, wandering ministers of vengeance, to aid and conduct me in my work. Let the cursed and hellish monster drink deep of agony. Let him feel the despair that is now tormenting me. I had begun this with solemnity and in awe, which almost assured me that the shades of my murdered friends heard and approved of my devotion, but the furies possessed me as I finished, and rage choked my words. I was answered through the stillness of the night by a loud, fiendish laugh. It rang in my ears long and heavily. The mountains echoed with it, and I felt as if all hell surrounded me with mockery and laughter. Surely in that moment I should have been possessed by frenzy and should have destroyed my miserable existence, but my vow had been heard, and I was reserved for vengeance. The laughter died away when a well-known and much-hated voice, seemingly close to my ear, addressed me in an audible whisper. I am satisfied, miserable wretch. You have determined to live, and that makes me satisfied. I darted towards the spot from which the sound had proceeded, but the devil eluded my grasp. Suddenly, the broad disk of the moon arose, and it shone full upon his ghastly, distorted shape as he fled with supernatural speed. I pursued him, and for many months this has been my task. Guided by a slight clue, I followed the windings of the Rhone, but it was in vain. The blue Mediterranean appeared, and by a strange chance I saw the fiend enter by night and hide himself in a vessel bound for the Black Sea. I took my passage on the same ship, but again he escaped, and I do not know how. Amidst the wiles of Tartary and Russia, though he still evaded me, I have been following in his track. Sometimes the peasants, scared by his horrid appearance, informed me of his path, and sometimes he himself, who feared if I lost all trace of him, would despair and die, would leave marks to guide me. The snows descended on my head, and I saw the print of his huge feet on the white plain. To you, first entering on life, to whom care is new and agony is not known, how can you understand what I have and still feel? Cold, want, and fatigue, these were the least pains that I was destined to endure. I had been cursed by some devil, and I carried around with me my eternal hell, yet still a spirit of good followed and directed my steps, and when I most murmured, they would suddenly excite me from seemingly insurmountable difficulty. Sometimes, when nature, overcome by hunger, sunk under exhaustion, sometimes a feast was prepared for me in the desert, which restored and inspired me. The fare was indeed coarse, such as the peasants of the country ate, but I will no doubt that it was set there by spirits that I had invoked to aid me. Often, when everything was dry, and the heavens cloudless, and I parched by thirst, a slight cloud would bedim the sky, shed a few drops that would revive me, and then vanish. I followed, and when I could, I would follow the courses of the rivers, but the demon generally avoided these, as it was here that the populations of the countries would chiefly collect. In other places, human beings were seldom seen, and I mostly subsisted on the wild animals that would cross my path. I had money with me, and I gained the friendship of villagers by distributing it, or I brought with me some food that I had killed, which, after taking a small bit, I always gave to those who provided me with a fire and utensils for cooking it. My life, as it was indeed hateful to me, and it was during sleep alone that I could taste any joy. Oh, blessed sleep! Often, when most miserable, I would sink into repose, and my dreams would lull me even into rapture. The spirits that guarded me had provided these moments or hours of happiness so that I might retain enough strength to fulfill my pilgrimage. Deprived of this, I should have sunk under all of my hardships. During the day, I was sustained and inspired by the hope of night, for when I was asleep, I saw my friends, my wife, and my beloved country again. I saw the benevolent face of my father, heard the silvery tones of my Elizabeth's voice, and I would see Clerval enjoying health and youth. Often, when wearied by a toilsome march, I persuaded myself that I was dreaming until night should come, and that I should then enjoy reality in the arms of my dear friends. What agonizing fondness I had for them! How did I cling to their dear forms! Sometimes they haunted even my waking hours, and I would persuade myself that they were still alive. At such moments, vengeance that burned within me would die in my heart, and I pursued my path towards the destruction of the demon more as a task enjoined by heaven, as the mechanical impulse of some power of which I was not even conscious, than as the desire of my soul. What his feelings, him who I pursued, were, I cannot know. Sometimes, indeed, he left marks in writing on the barks of trees or cut in stone that guided me and instigated my fury. My reign is not yet over. These words were legible in one of these inscriptions. You live, my power is complete. Follow me, I seek the ice of the north, where you can feel the misery of cold and frost, to which I am unbothered. You will find me near this place, if you are not too slow. A dead hare. Here, eat and be refreshed. Come, my enemy. We have yet to fight for our lives, but many hard and miserable hours must you endure until that arrives. He was a scoffing devil. Again do I vow vengeance. Again do I devote thee, miserable fiend, to torture and death. Never will I give up my search, I said, until he or I perish, and then with what ecstasy shall I join Elizabeth and my departed friends, who even now prepare me for the reward of my tedious toil and this horrid pilgrimage. As I still pursued my journey north, the snows became thicker and the cold increased to a degree almost too severe to live. The peasants were shut up in their hovels, and only a few of the most hardy ventured forth to seize animals whose starvation had forced them out of their hiding places to seek. The rivers were covered in ice, and no fish could be procured, and thus I was cut off from my chief article of maintenance. The triumph of my enemy increased with the difficulty of my labors. One inscription he left me was this: Prepare. Your toils only begin. Wrap yourself in furs and provide food, for we shall soon enter upon a journey where your sufferings will satisfy my hatred." My courage and perseverance were invigorated by his scoffing words. I resolved not to fail in my purpose, and calling upon heaven to support me, I continued with unabated fervor to traverse immense deserts, until finally the ocean appeared at a distance and formed the utmost boundary of the horizon. How unlike it was to the blue seas of the south! Covered with ice, it was only to be distinguished from the land by its superior wild and ruggedness. The Greeks wept for joy when they beheld the Mediterranean from the hills of Asia, and hailed with rapture the bounty of their toils. I did not weep, but I knelt down and with a full heart thanked my guiding spirit for conducting me in safety to the place where I hoped, notwithstanding my adversary's jibes, to meet and grapple with him. Some weeks before this period, I had procured a sleigh and dogs, and thus I traversed the snow with inconceivable speed. I know not whether the fiend possessed these same advantages, but I found that, as before, I had daily been losing ground in pursuit. I now gained on him, so much so that when I first saw the ocean, he was but a day's journey ahead of me, and I had hoped to intercept him before he would reach the beach. With new courage, therefore, I pressed on, and in 2 days I arrived at a wretched hamlet on the seashore. I inquired of the inhabitants concerning the fiend, and I got accurate information. A gigantic monster, they said, had arrived the night before, armed with a gun and many pistols, putting flight to the inhabitants of a solitary cottage through fear of his appearance. He had carried off their store of winter food, and placing it on a sleigh to draw which he had seized upon numerous trained dogs. He had harnessed the dogs, and that same night, to the joy of the horror-struck villagers, had pursued his journey across the sea in a direction that led to no land. They figured he would speedily be destroyed by the breaking of the ice, or hopefully frozen by the eternal frost. On hearing this, I suffered a temporary access to despair. He had escaped me, and I must commence a destructive and almost endless journey across the mountainous ices of the ocean, amidst cold that few of the inhabitants could even endure, and which I, the native of a genial, sunny climate, couldn't hope to survive. Yet, at the idea that the fiend should live and be triumphant, my rage and vengeance returned, and like a mighty tide, it overwhelmed every other feeling. After a slight repose, during which the spirits of the dead hovered all around and instigated me to toil and revenge, I prepared for my journey. I exchanged my land sled for one fashioned to the inequalities of the frozen ocean, and purchasing a plentiful stock of provisions, I left the land. I cannot guess how many days have passed since then, but I have endured misery which nothing but the eternal sentiment of just retribution that burns within my heart would have enabled me to support. Immense, rugged mountains of ice have often barred my passage, and I often heard the thunder of the ground sea which threatened me with destruction. But again the frost came and made the sea path secure. By the quantity of provision that I had consumed, I guess I had passed 3 weeks on this journey, and the continual protraction of hope, returning back upon the heart, often wrung bitter drops of despondency and grief from my eyes. Despair had indeed almost secured her prey, and I should soon have sunk beneath all this misery. Once, after the poor animals that conveyed me had, with incredible toil, gained the summit of a sloping ice mountain, and one of them, sinking under his fatigue, had died, I looked at the expanse in front of me with anguish. But suddenly my eye caught a dark speck upon the plain. I strained my eyes to discover what it could be, and I uttered a wild cry of ecstasy when I could see a sled and the distorted proportions of that well-known being within it. What a burning gush did hope revisit my heart. Warm tears filled my eyes, which I quickly wiped away so that they might not intercept the view I had of the demon. But still my sight was dimmed by the burning drops until, giving away to the emotions that was oppressing me, I wept out loud. But this was no time for delay. I disencumbered the dogs from their dead companion and gave them a large portion of food, and after letting them rest for an hour, which was absolutely necessary but irksome to me, I continued on my route. The sled was still visible, nor did I again lose sight of it, except in those moments when for a short time some ice rock would conceal it. I indeed did perceptibly gain upon it, and after nearly 2 days' journey, I beheld my enemy no more than a mile away, and that caused my heart to bound within me. But now, when I appeared almost within grasp of my foe, my hopes were suddenly extinguished, and I lost all trace of him more completely than ever before. A ground sea was heard. The thunder of its progress, as the waters rolled and swelled below me, became at every moment more ominous and terrific. I pressed on, but it was in vain. The wind rose, the sea roared, and as with the mighty shock of an earthquake, it split and cracked with a tremendous, overwhelming sound. The work was soon finished. In a few minutes, the tumultuous sea rolled between me and my enemy, and I was left drifting on a scattered piece of ice that was continually growing smaller and preparing me for a hideous death. In this manner, many appalling hours passed. Many of my dogs died, and I myself was about to sink under the accumulation of distress when I saw your vessel riding at anchor, and holding forth to me the hopes of life. I had no conception that vessels ever came this far north. It astounded me. I quickly destroyed part of my sled to construct oars, and by these was enabled, to my utter exhaustion, to move my ice raft towards your ship. I had determined, if you were going south, still to trust myself to the mercy of the seas and not abandon my purpose. I hoped to induce you to grant me a boat with which I could pursue my enemy, but your direction was northward. You took me on board when my vigor was exhausted, and I should soon have sunk under my multiplied hardships into a death which I still dread because my task is undone. When will my guiding spirits, in conducting me to the demon, let me the rest I so desire? Or must I die and he live on? If I do live, swear to me that he shall not escape, that you will seek him and satisfy my vengeance in his death. And do I dare ask of you to undertake my pilgrimage, to endure the hardships that I have? No, no, I am not that selfish. But when I die, if he should appear, if the ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you, swear that he shall not live. Swear he shall not triumph over my accumulated woes and survive to add to the list of his crimes. He is well spoken and persuasive, and once his words even had power over my heart, but don't trust him. His soul is as hellish as his form, full of treachery and fiendish malice. Do not listen to him. Call upon the names of William, Justine, Clerval, Elizabeth, my father, and call upon the name of the wretched Victor, and kill the beast. I will be near you if I am no longer among this mortal coil, and I will direct your sword. We're going to take a tiny break because we're not done yet, but now we're going back to the captain who took Victor on board. So we're going to shift perspectives in just a minute. And now to finish Frankenstein. You have read this strange and terrific story, Margaret, and do you not feel your blood congeal with horror, like that which even now curdles mine? Sometimes, seized with sudden agony, he could not continue his tale, and at others, with voice broken, yet piercing, he uttered with difficulty the words so replete with anguish. His fine, lovely eyes were now lit up with indignation, now subdued to downcast sorrow, and quenched in infinite wretchedness. Sometimes he commanded his face and tone, and related the most horrid incidents with a tranquil voice, suppressing all of his agitation, and then, like a volcano bursting forth, his face would suddenly change to an expression of the wildest rage as he shrieked out imprecations on his persecutor. His tale is connected and told with an appearance of the simplest truth, yet I own to you that the letters of Felix and Safi, which he showed me, and the apparition of the monster seen from our ship, brought me a greater conviction of the truth of his narrative than his assertions, however earnest and connected. Such a monster does have, then, a real existence. I can't doubt it, yet I'm lost in surprise and admiration. Sometimes I endeavored to gain from Frankenstein the particulars of this creature's formation, but on this point he was impenetrable. "Are you mad, my friend?" he said. "Or whither does your senseless curiosity lead you? Would you also create for yourself in the world a demon enemy? Peace! Learn of my misery. Do not seek to duplicate it." Frankenstein discovered that I had made notes concerning his history, and he asked to see them, and then he himself corrected and augmented them in many places, but principally in giving the life and spirit to the conversations that he had held with his enemy. "Since you have preserved my narration," he said, "I would not that a mutilated tale go down for posterity." Thus has a week passed, while I have listened to the strangest tale that ever has been imagined. My thoughts and every feeling of my soul have been drunk up by the interest for my guest which his tale and his own elevated and gentle manners have created. I wish to soothe him, yet can I counsel one so miserable, so destitute of all hope of consolation, to go on living? No. The only joy that he can now know will be when he composes his shattered spirit to peace and death. Yet he does enjoy one comfort, the offspring of solitude and delirium. He believes that when in dreams he can converse with his friends, and he derives from that the consolation from his misery, or excitements to his vengeance. He hopes that they are not the creations of his fancy, but the friends himself who visit him from the regions of the netherworld. This gives a solemnity to his reveries that render them to me almost as interesting as the truth. Our conversations are not always confined to his own history and misfortune. On every point of general literacy, he displays unbound knowledge and a quick, piercing apprehension. His eloquence is formidable and touching, nor can I hear him when he relates a pathetic incident or endeavors to move the passions of pity and love. I can't listen without tears. What a glorious creature must he have been in the days of his prosperity, when he is thus noble and godlike even in ruin. He seems to feel his own worth and the greatness of his fall. "When I was younger," he said, "I believed myself destined for some great enterprise. My feelings are profound, but I possessed a coolness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious achievements. This sentiment of the worth of my nature supported me when others would have been oppressed, for I deemed it criminal to throw away in grief those talents that might be useful to my fellows. When I reflected on the work that I completed, no less a one than the creation of a sensitive and rational being, I could not rank myself with the herd of common man. But this thought, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves just to plunge me lower than dirt. All of my speculation and hope are as nothing, and like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I am now chained in eternal hell. My imagination was vivid, yet my powers of analysis and application intense, and by the union of those qualities I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. Even now I cannot recollect without passion my dreams while the work was incomplete. I trod heaven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. From my childhood I was imbued with high hopes and lofty ambition, but how I am sunk! Oh, my friend, if you had known me as I used to be, you would not recognize me in this state of degradation. Despondency rarely visited me then. A high destiny seemed to bear me on until I fell, never to rise again. Must I lose this admirable being? I've longed for a friend. I have sought one who would sympathize with and love me, and behold, in these desert seas I have found such a one, but I fear I've gained him only to know his value and then lose him. I would reconcile him to life, but he repulses that idea. "I thank you, Walton," he said to me, "for your kind intentions toward such a miserable wretch. But when you speak of new ties and fresh affections, do you think that any can replace those who are gone? Can any man be to me as Clerval was, or any woman another Elizabeth? Even where affections are not strongly moved by any superior excellence, the companions of our childhood always hold a certain power over our minds which hardly any later friend can obtain. They know our infantile dispositions, which, however they might be after modified, are never eradicated, and they can judge of our actions with more certain conclusions than the integrity of our motives. A sister or a brother can never, unless indeed such symptoms have been shown early, suspect their sibling of fraud or false dealing. When another friend, however strongly they may be attached, may, in spite of himself, be contemplated with suspicion. But I had friends, dear not only through habit and association, but from their own merit, and wherever I am, the soothing voice of my Elizabeth and the conversation of my Clerval will ever be in my ear. They are gone, and but one feeling in such a solitude can persuade me to preserve my life. If I were engaged in any high undertaking or design fraught with extensive utility to my fellow man, then perhaps I could stay alive to fulfill it, but this is not my destiny. I must pursue and destroy the being to whom I gave existence, and then my time on earth will be fulfilled and I may depart. This is penned September 2nd. Another letter. My beloved sister, I write to you, encompassed by peril, ignorant whether I am doomed to ever see dear England and the dear friends that inhabit it. I'm surrounded by mountains of ice, which admit no escape and threaten at every moment to crush my ship. The brave fellows, who I have persuaded to be my companions, look to me for aid, but I have none to give them. There's something terribly appalling in our situation, yet my courage and hope do not desert me. It is still terrible to reflect that the lives of all these men have been endangered through me, and if we are lost, my madness will be the cause. And what, Margaret, is your state of mind about this? You will not hear of my destruction, and you will anxiously await my return. Years will pass, and you will have visitings of despair, but be tortured by hope. Oh, my beloved sister, the sickening failing of your heartfelt expectations is, in prospect, more terrible than even my own death. But you have a husband and lovely children. You may still be happy. Heaven make you so. My unfortunate guest, Victor, regards me with the tenderest compassion. He endeavors to fill me with hope, and he talks as if life were a possession which he valued. He reminds me how often the same accidents have happened to other ship navigators who have attempted the sea, and in spite of myself, he fills me with cheerful auguries. Even the sailors feel the power of his eloquence when he speaks. They don't despair. He rouses their energies, and while they hear his voice, they believe that these vast mountains of ice are molehills that will vanish before the resolution of man. These feelings are transitory. Each day of expectation delayed fills them with fear, and I almost dread a mutiny caused by all this despair. September 5th. A scene has just passed of such uncommon interest that, though it's highly probable that these papers may never reach you, I can't help myself but record it. We are still surrounded by mountains of ice, still in imminent danger of being crushed by their conflicts. The cold is excessive, and many of my unfortunate comrades have already found a grave amidst this desolation. Frankenstein has daily declined in health. A feverish fire still glimmers in his eyes, but he is exhausted, and when roused to any exertion, he quickly sinks again into apparent lifelessness. I mentioned in my last letter the fears that I entertained of a mutiny. This morning, as I sat watching the face of my friend, his eyes half closed and his limbs hanging listlessly, I was roused by a half-dozen of the sailors who demanded admission into the cabin. They entered, and their leader addressed me. He told me that he and his companions had been chosen by the rest of the sailors to come in deputation to me and to make me a requisition which, in justice, I could not refuse. We were immured in ice and probably would never escape, but they feared that if, as was possible, the ice should dissipate and a free passage be opened, that I would be stupid enough to continue my voyage and lead them into fresh danger after they might happily have made it through this one. They therefore insisted that I should engage with the solemn promise that if the vessel were freed, I would instantly head south. This speech troubled me. I had not despaired, nor had I yet conceived the idea of returning if we were freed, but could I in justice, or could I even possibly refuse this demand? I hesitated before I answered, when Frankenstein, who had at first been silent, and indeed appeared to hardly have enough life to even listen, roused himself. His eyes sparkled, and his cheeks flushed with momentary vigor. Turning towards the men, he said, "What do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you so easily turned from your design? Did you not call this a glorious expedition? And wherefore was it glorious? Not because the way was smooth and placid as in a southern sea, but because it was full of danger and terror, because at every new incident your fortitude was to be called forth and your courage exhibited, because danger and death surrounded it, and these you were brave and had overcome. For this was it glorious, for this was it honorable. You were hereafter to be hailed as the benefactors of your species, and your names adored as belonging to brave men who encountered death for honor and the benefit of mankind. And now behold, when the first imagination of danger, or, if you will, the first mighty and terrific trial of your courage, you shrink away and are content to be handed down as the men who did not have strength to endure the cold and peril, and then become poor souls who were chilly and returned to your warm fires. Why, that requires not this preparation. You shouldn't have even come this far and dragged your captain to the shame of defeat just to prove yourself cowards. Oh, be men, or be more than men. Be steady, hold to your purpose, and firm as a rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts seem to be. It is mutable, it cannot withstand you, if you say that it won't. Do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked upon you. Return as heroes who fought and conquered, and who know not what it is to turn their backs on their foe." Frankenstein spoke this with a voice so modulated to the different feelings expressed in his speech, with an eye so full of lofty design and heroism, that, can you wonder, the men were moved? They looked at each other, and they were unable to reply. I spoke. I told them to retire and think about what had been said, that I would not lead them farther north if they strenuously desired the contrary, but I hoped, when they thought, that their courage would return. They left, and I turned towards my friend, but he was sunk in languor and almost deprived of life. How this will all end, I don't know, but I had rather die than return shamefully and with my purpose unfulfilled. I do fear that this will be my fate. The men, unsupported by the ideas of glory and honor, will never willingly continue to endure such hardship. September 7th. The die is cast. I have consented to return if we are not destroyed. Thus my hopes are blasted by cowardice and indecision. I come back ignorant and disappointed. It requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with any patience. September 12th. It is past. I am returning to England. I have lost my hopes of utility and glory. I have lost my friend. But I will endeavor to detail these bitter circumstances to you, my dear sister, and while I am wafted towards England and you, I will not despair. September 9th, the ice began to move, and roarings like thunder were heard in the distance as islands split and cracked in every direction. We were in the most imminent peril, but as we could only remain passive, my chief attention was occupied by my unfortunate guest, whose illness had increased in such a degree that he was entirely confined to bed. The ice cracked behind us and was driven with force towards the north. A breeze sprung from the west, and on the 11th, the passage towards the south became free. When the sailors saw this, and that their return to their native country was assured, a shout of joy broke from them, and it continued going for a long time. Frankenstein, who was dozing, woke and asked the cause of the noise. "They shout," I said, "because they will soon return to England." "Do you then truly return?" "Yes," I told him. "I cannot withstand their demands. I cannot lead them unwillingly into danger, so I must return." "Do, if you will, but I will not. You may give up your purpose, but mine has been assigned by heaven, and I dare not quit. I am weak, but surely the spirits who assist me in my vengeance will give me enough strength." When he said this, he endeavored to spring from bed, but the exertion was too great for him, and he fell back and fainted. It was a long time before he was restored, and I often thought that life was entirely gone from him, but at length he opened his eyes, and he breathed with difficulty and could barely speak. The surgeon gave him a composing draught and ordered us to leave him undisturbed. In the meantime, the surgeon told me that my friend definitely did not have long to live. His sentence was pronounced, and I could only grieve and be patient. I sat by his bed watching him. His eyes were closed, and I thought he slept, but soon he called to me in a feeble voice, bidding me near, and said, "Alas, the strength I relied upon is gone. I feel that I shall soon die, and that he, my enemy and persecutor, might still be in being. Think not, Walton, that in the last moments of my existence I feel that burning hatred and desire for revenge that I once expressed. I do feel myself justified in desiring the death of my enemy. During these last days, I have been occupied in examining my past conduct, nor do I find it blamable. In a fit of madness, I created a rational creature, and I was bound towards him to assure, as far as was in my power, his happiness and well-being. This was my duty. But there was another still that was higher than this. My duty towards the beings of my own species had a greater call to my attention, because they included a greater proportion of happiness. Urged by this, I refused, and I was right in refusing to create a companion for my creature. He showed unparalleled malignancy and selfishness. He was evil and destroyed my friends. He devoted himself to the destruction of beings who possessed exquisite happiness and wisdom, and I do not know where his thirst for vengeance may end. He will be miserable. He might render no other wretched. He should die. The task of his destruction was mine, but I have failed. When actuated by selfish and vicious motives, I asked you to undertake my work, but I renew this quest now, when I am only induced by wisdom and reason. But I cannot ask that you renounce your country and friends. Think you that the groans of Clerval were music to my ears? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible. I messed up. Let's go back. I was like, that didn't actually work. Yet I cannot ask that you renounce your country and friends to fulfill this task, and now that you are returning to England, you will have very little chance of meeting him. But the consideration of these points and the well-balancing of what you may esteem your duties, I leave to you. My judgment and my ideas are already disturbed by the nearness of death, I dare not ask you to do what I think right. That he should live to be an instrument of mischief disturbs me in other respects this hour when I momentarily expect to be released. It is the one happy thing that I have enjoyed for years. The forms of my beloved dead are in front of me, and I hasten to their arms. Farewell, Walton. Speak happiness and tranquility. Avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in scientific discovery. Yet why should I say this? I myself have blasted these hopes. His voice became faint as he spoke, and finally, exhausted by this effort, he sunk into silence, and a half an hour after, he attempted again to speak, but was unable. He pressed my hand, and his eyes closed forever, while the irradiation of a gentle smile left his lips. My dearest Margaret, what comments can I make on the untimely extinction of this glorious soul? What could I say that will enable you to understand how sorrowful I am? All that I should express would be inadequate and feeble. My tears flow, my mind is overshadowed by disappointment, but I go towards England, and I may there find consolation. I am interrupted, though. What do these sounds portend? It's midnight. The breeze blows fairly, and the watch on the deck scarcely move. Again, there's the sound of a human voice, but hoarse. It comes from the cabin where the remains of Frankenstein are still lying. I must go and investigate. Good night, my sister. Great God. What a scene has just taken place. I am still dizzy with the remembrance of it. I hardly know whether I shall have the power to tell it. Yet the tale which I have recorded would be incomplete without this final, wonderful catastrophe. I entered the cabin where lay the remains of my ill-fated, admirable friend. Over him hung a form which I cannot find the words to describe. Gigantic in stature, yet uncouth and distorted in proportion. As he hung over the coffin, his face concealed by long locks of raggedy hair, one vast hand extended, its color and texture like that of a mummy. When he heard the sound of my approach, he ceased to utter exclamations of grief and horror and sprung towards the window. Never had I beheld a vision so horrible as his face, of such loathsome yet appalling hideousness. I involuntarily shut my eyes, and I endeavored to recollect what were my duties with regard to this destroyer, so I called on him to stay. He paused, looking at me with wonder, and again turning towards the lifeless form of his creator. He seemed to forget that I was there. Every feature and gesture seemed instigated by the wildest rage of some uncontrollable passion. "That is my victim," he explained. "In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. Oh, Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask you to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed you by destroying all you loved." But he is cold and cannot answer me. His voice seems suffocated, and my first impulse, which had suggested to me the duty of obeying the dying request of my friend in destroying his enemy, were now suspended by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. I approached this tremendous being. I dared not again raise my eyes to his face. There was something so unearthly in his ugliness. I attempted to speak, but the words died on my lips. The monster continued to utter wild and incoherent self-reproaches. At length I gathered resolution to address him in a pause of the tempest of his passion. "Your repentance," I said, "is now superfluous. If you had listened to the voice of conscience and heeded the stings of remorse before you had urged your diabolical vengeance to this extremity, Frankenstein would still be alive." "And do you dream?" said the demon. "Do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? He continued, pointing at the corpse, "he suffered not the consummation of the deed. Oh, not the 10,000th portion of anguish that had been mine during the lingering details of his execution. Selfishness hurried me on, while my heart was poisoned with remorse. Think you that the groans of Clerval were music in my ears? My heart was made to be susceptible to love and sympathy, and when wretched by misery to vice and hatred, it did not endure the violence of the change without tortures that you could not imagine. After the murder of Clerval, I returned to Switzerland, heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror, and I hated myself. But when I discovered that he, the author of my existence and of its unspeakable torment, dared wish for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in passions from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, well, envy and indignation filled me with a thirst for vengeance. I then remembered my threat, and I resolved it would be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing myself for a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master, of this impulse that I detested, yet could not disobey. But when she died, I was not miserable then. I had cast off all my feelings. I had subdued all anguish to riot in the excess of my despair. Evil, from then on, became my good. Urged by this, I had no choice but to adapt my nature to an element which I had unwillingly chosen. The completion of my demoniacal design had become a passion, and now it's ended. There lies my last victim. I was at first touched by the expression of his misery, yet when I remembered what Frankenstein had said about the creature's powers of eloquence and persuasion, and when I again cast my eyes on the lifeless form of my friend, my indignation was rekindled. "Wretch," I said, "it is well that you come here to whine over the desolation that you have made. You throw a torch into a pile of buildings, and when they have burned, you sit among the ruins and lament. Hypocritical fiend! If he, who you mourned, were still alive, still would he be the object. Again would he become your prey. It is not pity that you feel. You lament only because the victim of your malignancy has been withdrawn from your power." "Oh, it is not this, said the being. "Yet such must be the impression conveyed to you by what appears to be my actions. Yet I seek not a fellow feeling in my misery. No sympathy might I ever find. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection, which my whole being overflowed with, that I wished to be participated in. But now that virtue has become but to me a shadow, and happiness and affection have turned to bitter and loathing despair. Why should I seek sympathy? I am content to suffer alone. Well, my sufferings shall endure, and when I die, I will be well satisfied that abhorrence and opprobrium, abhorrence and hatred would load my memory. Once my fancy was soothed with dreams of virtue and fame and enjoyment. Once I hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the qualities which I was capable of feeling. I was nourished on thoughts of honor and devotion, but now crime has degraded me below the meanest animal. No guilt, no mischief, no malignancy, no misery can be found comparable to mine. When I run over the frightful catalogue of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creature whose thoughts were once filled with sublime, transcendent visions of the beauty and majesty of goodness. But it is even so. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Yet even that enemy of God and man had friends and associates, but not me. I am alone. You, who call Frankenstein your friend, seem to have a knowledge of my crimes and his misfortunes, but in the detail he gave you of them, he could not sum up the hours and months of misery that I endured, wasting in impotent passion. For while I destroyed his hope, I did not satisfy my own desires. They were forever craving. Still I desired love and fellowship, and still I was spurned. Is there no injustice in this? Am I to be thought the only criminal when all humankind has sinned against me? Why did you not hate Felix, who drove his friend from the door so harshly? Why did you not execute the rustic who sought to destroy the savior of his child? No, these are virtuous beings. I, the miserable and abandoned, I am the one to be spurned and kicked and trampled on. Even now my blood boils thinking of the injustice. But it is true that I am a wretch. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept, and grasped to death his throat who has never injured me or any other living thing. I have devoted my Creator, the select specimen of all that is worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. I pursued him even to that irredeemable ruin. There he lies, white, cold in death. You hate me, but your hatred cannot equal that with which I regard myself. I look at the hands that did the deed. I think on the heart which the imagination of all it conceived, and I long for the moment when these hands will meet my eyes and that imagination will haunt me no more. Fear not that I will be the instrument of any future mischief. My work is nearly complete. Neither yours nor any man's death is needed to consummate the series of my being and to accomplish that which must be done. It just requires my own. Do not think that I shall be slow to perform this sacrifice. I will quit your vessel on the ice raft that brought me here, and I shall seek the most northern extremity of the globe. I shall collect my funeral pile and consume to ashes this miserable body, that its remains may afford no light to any curious, unhallowed wretch who would create another such as I have been. I shall die. I shall no longer feel the agonies that consume me, or be the prey of feelings unsatisfied and unquenched. He is dead who called me into being, and when I am no more, the very remembrance of us both will vanish. I will no longer see the sun or the stars, or feel the wind on my cheek. Light, feeling, and sense will pass away, and in this condition I must find my happiness. Years ago, when the images which this world affords first opened to me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustle of leaves and the warble of the birds, And these were all to me. I should have wept to die now, but now it is my only consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest except death? Farewell. I leave you, and in you the last of humankind, who these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert alive and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better satiated in my living than in my death. But it was not so. You wanted my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness, and yet, if in some mode unknown to me, you had not ceased to think and feel, you would not desire against me a vengeance greater than that which I now feel. Blasted as you were, my agony was still worse than yours, for the bitter sting of remorse will not cease to rankle in my wounds until death closes them forever. But soon, the creature cried, with a sad and solemn enthusiasm, soon I shall die, and what I now feel will no longer be felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I will ascend my funeral pile triumphant and exult in the agony of the flames. The light will fade away, and my ashes will be swept into the sea. My spirit will be at peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think. Farewell. He then sprang from my cabin window. As he said this, he sprang upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost forever in the distance. The end. That was kind of a bummer. I mean, nobody won. That definitely was a book where nobody won. I still feel bad for the monster. I really do. Like, even with all of it. It does seem that our ship captain felt a lot more sympathy towards old Victor than I think I ever did. But then again, I guess that happens a lot. I am really curious. Somehow I do not think, and I know I've said this about 100 times during the reading of this, I don't think that the movie Frankenstein did anything near what the book did. This is definitely a case where I think the book probably surpassed the movie a whole lot. Interesting story. I think I liked it. As much as I did not like Victor Frankenstein, I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed the chase. I did feel for the monster, though. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Please do leave me a thumbs up. And if you have not already hit the subscribe button, please do hit the subscribe button, because we are going to be starting another book in the public domain that I am quite interested in reading. It's even illustrated, which just is even more fun. And that is Beverly of Graustark. Or Graustark. This one, I have no idea what we are in for, but I do know that when we finish it, I'm kind of thinking about having a live stream where we watch the movie that goes with it, because the movie is also in public domain. I haven't finalized all the details of that in my head, and I hope that this is a good book. Never heard of it, and I just sort of picked it up at one of my resale shops because the first paragraph seemed interesting enough to grab it, and it had a pretty picture on the front. I've since learned that this could potentially be the origin of that whole like Mulan trope, where the girl dresses, cross dresses and goes undercover to protect the man that she's in love with, or something along those lines. When I was dabbling through Wikipedia, I came across something about that. There's some sort of gender bending. It takes place in a fictionalized European kingdom, and hopefully it won't be too racist or anything. That is always the hardest part about reading older literature, is a lot of it's really racist. But we will cross that bridge when we come to it. Anyway, we're going to be starting this probably Saturday. I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow night, but probably won't start this until Saturday because it is the holidays, and yeah, it's just sort of one of those things. You just have to have a little bit of time to decompress and get ready for the holidays. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. As I said before, please do hit that thumbs up button if you haven't already. I really do appreciate it. It always does make me smile. And I will see you on Saturday for old Beverly of Graustark.